Well, could be. I remember snow on Yep. Me too. And 48 hours later, it's 8 o'clock. The Flagstaff. Oh, it must be set out. If the needs change, just tell me.
Yeah, because you'll have to also tilt, so you can go up and then you may have to tilt.
Right. Yeah. Tell me which direction.
Yep, you can see. You can just loosen this up right here and push up, and then this you just grab it, tilt it. Okay. No, don't even loosen it. Just grab it and move it. Okay.
I got it. I tried to it out. Up here.
Over there? And I make a call. Everybody have a seat.
You're the man now. You're on.
If we could have everybody find a seat, we'll get started. Should I smile directly into that?
Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lowell Observatory. My name is Kevin Schindler and I'm the historian here at the observatory. And it's my pleasure to MC today's event in which we celebrate Carolyn Shoemaker, our family friend, our colleague, something for everybody she was to us. And it is such a great thing for me to be standing here and seeing so many people that touched her lives and whose lives she touched. And we're going to hear from several people. Our format today is we'll have several designated folks come up and say a few words about Carolyn, working with her or family life or whatever. And then at the end, we're going to have an open mic where anybody can come up and say a few words. So to start off, I'd like to introduce the executive director, Dr. Jeffrey Hull, the executive director of Lowell Observatory, who's going to welcome us.
Hey, thank you, Kevin, and thanks to all of you for joining us on this beautiful afternoon here on Mars Hill. It is our pleasure and our honor to host this event here at Lowell Observatory, incredibly appropriate to do so. I met Carolyn very shortly after arriving at Lowell, which was, I think, back in the late Cretaceous, 1992. as I recall, at a staff picnic, and just got into a nice conversation with her, and she was telling me all about Lowell and about Flagstaff and Northern Arizona, and just making me feel entirely at home and entirely welcome here in my new life in Northern Arizona. And it was such a pleasure working with Carolyn over the ensuing years as a colleague, and then later as a member of the Lowell Advisory Board. And more recently, as advancing age increasingly had confined her to her home, I had the pleasure of visiting her there on a couple of occasions, because I would get requests from time to time from a student or a member of the media, someone just wanting to sit with her for a little bit and hear directly from her about her life and her life's work and her impact on those around her. Such was her renown as a scientist and as a role model for us all. She will forever be remembered as a member of the Lowell family, and we are very pleased to have this event here on Mars Hill this afternoon. Thank you again for joining us, and I very much look forward to all the reminiscences this afternoon as we celebrate her life. Thank you and welcome. Kevin?
Thanks, Jeff. This event was the workings of a lot of different people working on a committee, but it was spearheaded by one person, Susan Golightly, a family friend of Carolyn's, a local business owner, and it was really her oomph that made this happen. So I'd like to turn it over to Susan to talk a little bit about how this event came to be, and also an honor here at the observatory that Susan's been leading. Susan?
Yes, I'm short. I'm just a friend. I'm not from the astronomy industry, but my husband and I, Mike, are country neighbors of Carolyn and Jean's. And in 1976, my 3 little kids and I could get on our mules and horses and in 15 minutes go exploring through the forest and be at Carolyn and Jean's. In about 1980, is something wrong with this? Okay.
Different height speakers. They're just trying to
Different height speaker, just shoot it up over my head. Probably in about 1980, Carolyn and I were visiting, and she was telling me some amazing things. And I said, Carolyn, I need to put you on the speaker circuit for all of the service clubs in Flagstaff. And it happened. So the quiet little woman became known more in Flagstaff to everyone. Those in the industry knew who she was, but in our community at that point, Jean was known because of walking on, the moon. Okay, forward a fast few years forward, Carolyn took up residency at the Peaks, the Senior Mentored Living Center. My car was programmed to turn into the Peaks several times a day because my mother resided there for 13 years. So after my mom was gone, Carolyn moved in and my car just would turn automatically. So we had a lot of visiting until COVID hit. And then it became, I would drop off decootiized things to get to her. She would read them, we would call, we would talk about it. So I'd get things, community things to her that she maybe might not have known about. Lowell Observatory about that time, I forgot to tell you, after COVID relaxed a little bit, Carolyn and I would have lots of lunches, lots of dinners, lots of drives to see the changing leaves and changing seasons. And one of our favorite things to do was to take a picnic up to the San Francisco Peaks and watch the sun go down. Or we would go to La Fonda and have chili rellenos. She had never eaten a chili relleno before I took her there. So that was a fun thing that we did pretty darn often. She'd say, I'm just hungry for that, and off we'd go if we could, or we would order it and eat it somewhere else. Lowell Observatory about this time was looking for nominees for a unique part of the upcoming Astronomy Discovery Center. On a diverse universe wall, it would be made up of people with compelling stories that would serve as role models to inspire the next generations. So I nominated Carolyn without telling her, because what if she wasn't chosen for one of the few names that would be on that wall? I mean, I thought it would be very appropriate, Flagstaff here and what she was known for, but I didn't know what for sure they were looking for. So after she was accepted, I took her out for dinner, apologized for asking, for nominating her without asking her permission. and told her what I had done. And she cried. You know, Carolyn was really very, very, very humble. Her Lowell Diverse Universe plaque reads, "It's never too late." That's the title on it. Carolyn Shoemaker earned university degrees in history, political science, and literature, but she was fascinated by the work of her astrogeologist husband, Gene. At the age of 51, she decided to embark on her own career in science. Carolyn discovered hundreds, and we know this, of asteroids, comets, included Comet Levy 9. Carolyn passed, as we all know, last August. Then I got the bill for sponsoring the plaque, and it was a hefty chunk of change. So Mike and I talked about it and figured we could just make payments every couple of years to cover it. And then I was talking to Jody Swan, a good friend of Carolyn's, and she said, you know what, let's contact some of Carolyn's friends, maybe to honor her, they'd like to help sponsor it. So created an email, it went out viral worldwide, and it was funded very quickly. Around town, though, people kept asking me through their COVID masks, is there ever going to be anything to honor Carolyn? And, you know, all I could say is I really don't know. I was keeping in touch with the family, Patrick, Christine, and Linda, and I would keep them up on how the funding was going for the plaque. And I finally said, you know what? I live in town. I have a big mouth. I know a lot of people. Could I do something for you? And you guys just come. You don't have to do a thing. And they said yes. So that's how this came to be. It sounds like a Mother West Wind story for those of us of our generation that grew up with Mother West Wind, how it came to be. I called Jeff Hall, who you just saw. He's a friend. He plays the organ at our church, and I just have to brag on him because we have a very complicated organ, and he is a master at it. And I said, Jeff, we'd like to do something for Carolyn. Could we maybe use Lowell? And he said, absolutely yes. And then I was telling Jody about it, and she said, well, I want to do that too. I want to help plan that. And then we started looking out for other people that maybe would help, and it exploded. So I have the best committee in the world. All of this planning was a joy, it was a pleasure, and it was fun. So I have a very astute committee. I'd like to introduce them. Would the committee please stand, turn, even though you've got your mask on. You can take it down if you want. And as I read your name, stand and wave at the audience because you need to take some acclaim here. We have Patrick Shoemaker, Christine Shoemaker Banto, and Linda Shoemaker Salazar. And we have a lot of Shoemaker family here today. And we're so glad everybody could come. Jody Swan. Where's Miss Jody? She's back there with a special collar around her neck. I want to tell you, Jody is such a workhorse on this committee. She's amazing. Jody started, she actually was a USGS planetary program. She started to work for Gene in '63, met Carolyn. She was secretary for the astronaut training program for USGS. After Apollo, she managed the planetary data facility at the branch of astrogeology at USGS. Jen Blue. Jen is not with us, but she says, what I did professionally is not really important. What is important is that I was lucky enough to occupy the office next to Carolyn's, where I could regularly hear her laughter and share a conversation. That proximity sparked a delightful friendship. Larry Soderbaum. Larry, stand up and turn around, and you could take that mask down if you wanted. Larry was the branch chief of USGS several times, and he says now he's an emeritus troublemaker. I don't know. I hear some teeters, so that must be true. You're living up to it. Gene was Larry's academic father, so it was natural for him to call Carolyn Mom, and henceforth she always called him son. What an honor. Ken Harkenhoff, title since 1998. Where's Ken? Ken, there he is. Is a research geologist at USGS. His expertise is the design, calibration, and operation of cameras on and in orbit around Mars. When he has time, he says he's going to try to figure out what all that means. Lottie Herkenhoff, in 1983, was working at Caltech, and she went into the field with Carolyn, and Jean. Kevin Schindler is my friend. You've already heard from Kevin. And I call him my little brother because he looks just like my little brother. Kevin is Lowell's historian. He told you that, and the public information officer. Scott Roberts is the founder and president of Explore Scientific, and he is streaming this gathering that he has created, and he is going to try to do something with YouTube for people to get on and learn about today and about Carolyn. Rachel Edelstein is my friend and the Lowell Annual Giving Officer. She held our hands when we were trying to raise the big chunk of change for Carolyn's plaque. Helene Lane is the Lowell Event Coordinator. David Levy, Terry Mann, and Mark Robinson will be introduced later in the program. It takes a loving village to put something like this on, and we're so thankful that you're all here. We are so thankful to Lowell, the committee, the Astronomical League for supplying our insurance for today's event, Scott Roberts for streaming, and donors to fund our cookies and our water. Putting this on, as I told you, was really joyful and a really such an easy, fun thing to do because people wanted to do this. So, and by your presence, it's very evident how loved and admired Carolyn was.
Thank you, Susan. So let's talk about Carolyn a little bit. Our first speaker is Dr. Mark Robinson, Professor of Geological Sciences at Arizona State University and Principal Investigator on NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Mark, come on over.
Okay, thank you. I have to keep my eye out over here because little Jack keeps wandering off into the woods. I've been over the last couple of weeks trying to figure out what I was going to say to this group of people here, and I guess to start off with, just say that Carolyn was my friend. I loved her and miss her. But that doesn't fill 8 minutes. So I then started thinking about when did I first meet Carolyn, and it was when I was a undergraduate intern with Ken Tanaka. And it's been so long, I've been racking my brains to try to figure out what year it was. It was 1986 or 1987. But maybe some of you remember that, not because I was there, but it was the year there was this big, either the 20th or 25th anniversary of astrogeology, and there was a big open house. And that's how I met Carolyn and Jean. Because back then, laser printers were a brand new thing, and a lot of software most software didn't know how to send pretty fonts to laser printers, and I knew how to use LaTeX. So first Jean and then Carolyn kept coming into my office and handing me a handwritten caption to print out and put on the wall. And after about 2 days of this, I finally asked them, who is that guy that keeps coming in here? He goes, oh, that's Jean Shoemaker. And of course, I had no idea who Jean Shoemaker was. I was just this little kid from Alaska. But Carolyn took me into her office one day. It wasn't really an office. It was in Building 1. A lot of you that's been gone so long don't even know of it. But she had I think it's called the blink comparator set up in there. She was telling me about this, eyeball science, as she and Jean used to call it. And it was really pretty. I was quite impressed. And then the summer was over, I left, and I didn't see Jean or Carolyn again until it was 1994, I guess, 1994. And I came back to USGS. I was a scientist there. And that's when Jean and Carolyn and I became really good friends. They used to come over for dinner. I just hang out, chat with Carolyn. The story you just told a minute ago that her infectious laughter. And we didn't really talk about science a lot, believe it or not. We just talked about stuff. And maybe part of that was a little known fact. My undergraduate degree is in political science, and Carolyn's degree was in political science too. So we became really good friends. And then I moved off to Chicago in 1997 and, lost touch. Didn't really see her again until it was either 2011 or 2012 at one of these big science conventions in Tucson. And everybody goes down there and they hear talks. And I was between getting ready to give my talk, and I was sitting out in the hallway trying to make sure I had my talk straight in my head. And I hear this voice down the hall, Mark! And she comes over here and gives me a big bear hug. And we just sat out in the hallway there for about an hour and a half on that bench yakking. Finally, I was like, well, and I by then I'd moved back to Phoenix, and I go, why don't we see each other? So after that, when I would come up to Phoenix, we would go up and have lunch together, or at least, and then I would call. And it was really great to reestablish that friendship. And then I think it must have been like the year before. Everything is marked by COVID now, right? So it was the summer before COVID. Sasha and Jack, Sasha's my wife. She's not here. She's feeling a little bit ill today. Took her out to Winslow to stay at La Posada because she said she loved the place and it was a great way to get away from, life in Flagstaff and relax and everything. And unfortunately, Jack got really sick, so I had to abandon Carolyn in Winslow. But I think she forgave me for that. Christy was there too, so she was in good hands. And then she called me up the next day, of course, and thanked me for the trip. Didn't say anything about me abandoning her in Winslow. And, was checking in on Jack. And then COVID hit, and we talked on the phone a little bit. You know how you always think you should do more? But then I started sending her books, because we both have a great interest in reading. So she would just get these unmarked packages with books in them from Amazon.com. And then I would call her up, and I'd be like, oh, you sent the book. And we would talk about the book, and it was a lot of fun, whatever it happened to be. And again, it's like, as I was mulling over the last couple of weeks, it was really strange. We never really talked about science very much, or didn't talk about the moon. And for those of you who know me, I'm always talking about the moon, right? But we just had fun talking about life, I guess. And then the last time I saw her was only about 2 weeks before she died. I was hosting a science team meeting in Phoenix, and we came up to Flagstaff for a field trip, and I called her up, and I go, you want to come out and hang out with a bunch of nerds? She goes, yes, a party. I think that was something like that, almost quote unquote. So I go and pick her up, and, I guess all of you know Carolyn. She was somewhat stubborn at times, right? And she wouldn't let me help her get into the car or, open the door. I could go myself. And so now we're driving into town, and I kind of looked over and said, do you know any good gossip? And she leaned forward and she goes, yes. Did you hear? Jody moved in with her boyfriend. And I said, did she ask your permission? She has a very serious look on her face. No. And I thought I was going to have a wreck after that, because we started laughing so hard, right? So then we get to, I think we were at Lumberyard Brewery, and I asked her, do you want a beer? And the waitress came by and she goes, yes. She goes, well, what do you want? She goes, I don't know, just order me something. So I got the lowest alcohol beer on the menu. They showed up, right, and I'm sipping my beer, and I looked over there, and her beer was gone. The whole thing, just like in about 5 minutes. And then she didn't eat much of her dinner, and so we got it packed up to go. And then I said, well, what do you want to do now? And she just kind of leaned on my shoulder, and she goes, Mark, I have to go home and go to bed. I said, but what about the partying? She just said, next time. So I took her home, and of course, being stubborn, she wouldn't let me walk her up to her room. I don't know, maybe she thought I was going to make a pass or something. But she's very independent. And then maybe I'll just stop this right now. Again, I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to say here, but those are my experiences with Carolyn. She was my friend. I love her. I miss her. Thank you.
For the past quarter century, if you've heard the name Shoemaker, it's often affiliated with another name, David Levy, because they spent a lot of time together looking for comets and asteroids, and of course famously discovered Shoemaker-Levy 9, which impacted Jupiter. So David's here to talk about some of his observing time with the Shoemakers, and he's got some really great stories, so we look forward to hearing this. Dave, come on over. Make sure to speak into the mic. I'll try to
Okay, thanks so much. And you can send me the bill after. Yeah. Thank you so much for asking me to speak today, and Susan, thank you. And thank you for forcing me to limit this talk to 4 hours and 17 minutes in Latin. Anyway, I'm here to say goodbye to Carolyn Shoemaker, and I'm here to talk with you about her and about the dear friendship that we had and we still have. And as I got here today and I realized this event is a lot more emotional for me than I thought it would be. But first thing I did in looking at the chairs is I looked around to see if Carolyn was here yet. And I like to imagine Jean and Carolyn just coming in and sitting in the back there quietly. And I go up to them and said, "What the heck are you doing here?" And Jean looks at me and said, "We wouldn't miss this for the world." So let's imagine they're here with us in our hearts. The first time that I visited the Flagstaff area was in June of 1967, and my heart just skipped a beat and flew when we came on that final hill at the end of the interstate going into Flagstaff, because I realized then, and I realize now, that Flagstaff is the city of discovery. It is the city where Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto in 1930. I would later become very good friends with him, and it was the city where Jean and Carolyn spent so much of their very rich and wonderful lives. On that trip, I went to visit Lowell Observatory. This was my first visit up to Lowell, and we had a very, very interesting tour guide. Robert Burnham was our tour guide, and of course none of us knew who Robert Burnham was, except one. And he is in the middle of the tour. He said, "What is your name?" He said, "I'm Bob Burnham." "The Bob Burnham who's discovered 6 comets?" And he said, "Yeah, but I'm kind of a has-been now. Haven't found any in a while." He and I had a long discussion that day. His advice was, never give up. If you don't give up, sooner or later you will find a comet, and avoid the Virgo group of galaxies. And I took that advice and still do, and it's still a lot of fun. My first observing run with Jean and Carolyn was in August actually of 1989. I just discovered, I think, my 5th comet, and I was Jean was with the Voyager Neptune experience, and Kelly, I'll bet you were there too. And Carolyn was teaching me about the films, how to load them, and we're observing them together. And on the second night she says, "David, you've learned a lot faster than I thought you would, and we may actually run out of film." I went down to the basement, loaded up the next film, and came back and I said, "Carolyn, dear, this is our last film." And she said, "I can't believe it. We have 3 more nights to go. How can this be our last film?" I said, "Well, it is, but I have an idea. I brought some Tri-X with me, a little roll of Tri-X. And we're going to load the Tri-X in the film holder and scotch tape them together, and then I'll develop them." And Carolyn said, "Are you sure that's going to work?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll take them to the drugstore, get them developed, and when they come back, I'll match them up again, put more scotch tape, and you'll be able to scan them. You won't even know the difference." Carolyn's mind said, "How am I going to tell this fairly decent young person that he's a total idiot?" She looked at me and she said, "It's not going to work." And I said something else, and then she said, "David, I have the very strange feeling that I've just been had." And I looked at Carolyn and I said, "I think that feeling is because you've just been had." And that started our friendship, and it never ended. There was always humor, always fun. Jean and Carolyn were at my wedding. In fact, I think I was one of the few people that they ever telephoned from Australia to make sure they had the date right for our wedding. And they came, they were there, they danced the hora at the Flangro Science Center where Wendy and I were married. Wendy is not able to be here today, but she just sends her best wishes to everybody, and I will pass yours on to her when I see her tonight. And but in case you're interested, she's doing very, very well. Just a little hard to travel. Anyway, To summarize the story of our most important comet, Carolyn discovered Shoemaker-Levy 9 on the 25th of March, 1993, on images that she had taken, that I had taken and Jean had taken on the 23rd of March that year. And her first words were to me, "David, I don't know what I've got, but it looks like a squashed comet." And that's what it was. That started us. The comet wrapped us in its tail, flimsy tails, and took us along for its final orbit of Jupiter. We went together to Baltimore and Washington for the impacts, and it was just so interesting. And how could Jean and Carolyn take their wonderful personalities and show them to the world? They did that at that very first press conference. In the middle of the press conference, Jean is talking, and Heidi Hamel walks in unannounced from the side with a picture she just got downloaded from Hubble Space Telescope. And she just walks in, shows it to Jean, and Jean says, "Oh my, you take over, Heidi." And Heidi's comment that night, "We're in for an exciting week." Wasn't that something else? We had a lot of press conferences. Carolyn and Jean did some, I did some. One of the ones I was doing on was July the 20th, 1994. And Jean suddenly walked in at the back of where we were meeting, and he motions to us, come here, David." And I looked at the lady sitting next to me, and I said, "Nothing is going to get me out of this press conference." And the lady nodded in agreement, and I just sat there. And then Jean ran up to me and said, "David, we've been invited to the White House." And I looked at the lady and I said, "Except that." We did get to meet President Clinton, but the highlight, I think, was the long and nice conversation we had with Vice President Gore. That was a lot of fun. It was really a wonderful, wonderful experience. And in later years, I spent a lot of time talking with Carolyn. I telephoned her at the peaks every Monday, to the point it got so regular, she'd pick up the phone and she'd say, if it's David on the phone, this has got to be Monday." We did that for a number of years until she died last August. I'm going to close with a quotation that I was supposed to read to you, but Susan said I have to do it from memory. I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but here goes. I think it remains my favorite quotation from all of the ones that are appropriate to Jean and to Carolyn. I like to think if they're anywhere out there right now, they may well be on the moon, right next to the little plaque that bears these words from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. "Come, gentle night, come, loving, black-browed night, give me my Romeo, and when he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and all the world will be in love with night, and pay no worship to the garish sun." Goodbye, Carolyn, and thank you.
Thank you, David. Carolyn, of course, was affiliated with the U.S. Geological Survey here in town for a long time. And our next speaker also was affiliated with USGS for more than 30 years. Dr. Lisa Gaddis is now the director of the Lunar and Planetary Institute, but she still has really strong ties here to Flagstaff. And Lisa's going to tell us about how Carolyn served as a mentor to youth and young ladies and others. Lisa?
Well, boy, were those hard acts to follow. I'm sorry. I hope you all got a really good look at David's fabulous tie. So, like Mark, and Mark and I, by the way, are graduate siblings from the University of Hawaii, so we've been friends a long time. I've been friends with many people here for a long time as well. It is seriously an honor to be here on this fabulous day to remember Carolyn. So I first met Carolyn while I was standing in my office in Building 1 in astrogeology. I had only been there a few months. I didn't know anyone very well. Thank you. It was a weekend, and as far as I know, there was no one else in the building. And I was playing music. I was playing Otmar Liebert's Nouveau Flamenco. Barcelona Nights was playing, and I recommend it. I was startled, had my back to the door, and I was startled by a voice from the doorway from a small white-haired woman with a pixie haircut. In fact, it was exactly that pixie haircut in the picture there. And she said, "Ah, that's lovely." And she introduced herself as Carolyn, Jean's wife, and I knew Jean a little bit by that time. And we met and chatted and we bonded just a little over some lighthearted music from the Southwest. I hadn't yet met Jean at that time, but I knew him because of his booming laugh, which came from down the hall often in Building 1. And later, of course, I heard them laughing together many times. I recall thinking it was a wonderful sound of companionship and humor. One of the wonderful things I recognized right away at the USGS is that the scientists, they worked with data. They did their research and they took it very seriously. And of course, the two of them practiced this together for many decades. I knew them both as friendly elder statesmen who always seemed to be coming and going together and altogether quite busy. As a new postdoc and likely not intended to be at USGS very long, I never imagined at that time that I'd have much to do with either one of them. But not too many months later, we would all attend a USGS Halloween party. I went dressed as a devil. Wes Ward was a train engineer. Beryl Lukita was a Viking. Hugh Kiefer was a rocket scientist. And would you believe it? Jean was a clown. Does anyone who's here remember Carolyn's costume? I can't remember for the life of me, but I'm quite certain she was dressed up. I felt right at home and among friends. I ended up staying at astrogeology for almost 30 years. In 1991, back then in other words, I knew that Jean was founder of the USGS branch of astrogeology, and in many ways he was our reason for being, and for being there in Flagstaff. I knew that a major focus of his research were the planetary impact craters formed by what he called the hail of bullets, the impactors always present in space, and that he'd worked especially hard at Meteor Crater right down the road just off I-45, or I-40. I learned that through his fieldwork there in places like Reese Crater and in his lunar mapping and research, he understood that major catastrophes could occur on Earth in the blink of an eye, formed by bodies from space through impact. I also learned that he struggled to get support for that work, that kind of work, to understand the populations of impactors such as comets and asteroids. I was enthralled to learn that Jean and Carolyn together had embarked on what they called their mom and pop program based at Palomar Observatory to find new Earth-crossing celestial bodies and to understand their populations. And of course they worked with many like-minded explorers, including people like David Levy. And while I didn't understand these things very well at the time, I didn't have the context, seeing them standing in the hallway of Building 1, chatting with the likes of Carl Sagan, reassured me of their greatness and their significance in the world of science. And perhaps more importantly to me later, I saw that Carolyn was an important partner in this work. I didn't know then that she was not formally trained in science, or that she had just recently received an honorary doctorate from Northern Arizona University just the year before, in 1990. Her intelligence, and I think anyone who met her and chatted with her just briefly observed that, her patience, her attention to detail, and her ability to persevere deep into the night were recognized by Jean and other astronomers, and she learned the tools of the trade by doing science right along with them. And together they discovered scores of such bodies, hundreds of asteroids and dozens of comets, and they and others scoured the Earth for craters or evidence of such impacts. This, the potential hazard from Earth-crossing asteroids, is one of the most important scientific findings of our time. And I haven't even mentioned their vindication, their spectacular discovery, together with David Levy, and choreographed to another piece, I believe it's Beethoven's First Symphony, Fourth Movement, of Comet Shoemaker Levy 9. And as you've heard today, The Shoemaker Levy 9 was a string of asteroids, dust and gas, and it was later observed to strike Jupiter, and it left behind huge holes that persisted for months, and along with strong atmospheric effects. Jean was proven right, and this led to the end of the mom and pop approach and to a much larger program and hopefully much more funding of research into near-Earth objects or near-Earth asteroids. And our hosts here at Lowell have a major role in exactly that kind of research, as do many other astronomers around the world. So as a young scientist, watching these events from a distance, I was amazed for them and for us all. I was so proud to be a member of astrogeology, with people like the Shoemakers and Larry Soderblom and Hugh Kiefer and Bärbel Lukid and Phil Davis and many more. The understanding of these hazards, the need to conduct this research, and the potential effects on the entire Earth show the value of planetary science writ large, and the importance was plain to see. And our friend Carolyn, history major, Jean's wife, mother of 3, had an integral role in these discoveries. For me as a young scientist and later a mother, this exemplified the worth of contributions of women in science and demonstrated the value of perseverance and persistence. This taught me that great scientific discoveries can come from what appear to be ordinary people who are in fact quite extraordinary and who have perhaps an extraordinary devotion to science. So when I asked my friends and colleagues about Carolyn's influence on them, they echo the same kind of thoughts. Carolyn set an example for all of us and showed that scientists of all kinds and from anywhere have the potential to do great things and to reach for the stars as she did. After Jean's death and as Carolyn recovered from her injuries, she and I became friends. And along with others in Flagstaff, like Jody Swan, Jen Blue, Lottie and Ken Herkenhoff, and others, I think and hope that our friendship was helpful to her in her later years, and I know that she was beloved by all who knew her at USGS. And she wrote in 1909 in an article called The Ups and Downs of Planetary Science, "Without the human relationships we cherish, knowledge would count for naught. Both are to be nourished. Henceforth, I'll continue my scientific exploration, knowing that I must not neglect the other side of living." So like many of you here, I'll be forever grateful to have been Carolyn's friend and to have been part of her other side of living. We loved her, we'll miss her. But every time I look at the moon, I'm reminded of her and their impact and their value not only to science, but to all of humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And as Lisa mentioned, Carolyn was recognized for professional work. She won many awards. And we're going to hear about one of these right now from Terry Mann, amateur astronomer, past president of the Astronomical League, and now secretary and treasurer for the region. Terry?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I met Carolyn in 2010. Both of us were at Greenbank, West Virginia at a star party called StarQuest, and we immediately just clicked. We became friends. And from that point on, we just stayed in contact and spoke a lot about everything that was going on. So while I was there, before we left, we made a deal. We made a deal that every time I came to Phoenix, I was going to call Carolyn because I was going to stay at her house. And I said, Carolyn, I'll take that deal, but we're going to have a conference at Bryce Canyon, and I want you to be our keynote speaker for that conference. She said, yeah, I think I can do that. So from then on, we started planning for Bryce. And when she came to Bryce, she came to a whole group of amateur astronomers. Now, in case you don't know about the Astronomical League, we have about 22,000 members. We're international, but mostly in the U.S. We have over 300 clubs across the U.S. and in 10 different regions. So we do a lot of astronomy, whether you're really a professional at this or a very high amateur professional at this, or a child that's a beginner. We do a lot of stuff there. We have a lot of programs that we do. But when she came there, she became a friend. Before that, she was, oh my gosh, Carolyn Shoemaker. And all of a sudden now, she became a friend. they all got to know her, and we had a meteorite dealer there. And while she was there, all of us bought meteorites that had the little tab on it, and Carolyn autographed, I would bet, 200 meteorites at that star party. And I came up at the beginning and I said, Carolyn, you are just going to be wore out before this is over. She just gave me that smile and rolled her eyes a little bit. And she did a magnificent job. And since that time on, she has been a friend of the Astronomical League, an honorary member, and just a good friend, I think, to everybody she had met. But the deal was, when I came to Phoenix, I called Carolyn. Well, what happened is I called her all the time anyway, so she always knew when I was coming. So on August 7th, I was headed out here, and I flew into Phoenix. The deal is, I go to Carolyn's house. She's always my first stop. And on this stop, she was at the Peaks. So I went to the Peaks. Had lasagna in this hand and a surprise in this hand. And we ate our lunch, and I said, Carolyn, I got a surprise. I said, you have been selected to win the Astronomical League Award for this year. And I said, it is the highest award that the Astronomical League gives away. It goes to a person that has done an outstanding job of something that has been done in astronomy and science and has really inspired the public, which she had definitely done many times over. So I showed it to her and I said, Carolyn, I came here to present this to you in person because I have a request. The Astronomical League is having a virtual conference because COVID. We'd canceled our first year. We felt we needed to have a conference, even if it had to be online. I said, Carolyn, I'm going to ask you if you would come online with me. And I said, I would present this. And this is a worldwide broadcast that Scott Roberts will be broadcasting. And she said, well, I don't know if I have everything. I said, Carolyn, I've got it all with me. I'll come back. We'll set it up. We'll present it online. And your friends all over the world can watch this. And she said, that sounds pretty good. So we put it all back, put it on her shelf. And I turned around and I looked at her. And I said, Carolyn, I'll be back on the 21st. And after that, it just came to front with all of me. And, I'm sitting here listening to all the great stories from all of you. And I thought, she has reached out to so many people without realizing it. She was such a humble, sweet person. She was like that grandma that I always wanted. And I felt like I adopted her immediately. So I looked at her and said, at that point I would be back. And when I knew everything, I had to present this online. I did present this because it's what should be done. It was Carolyn's award, and so we went ahead and presented it online anyway. But as I said, I listened to all these stories. You guys are all going to understand everything I'm saying because she was a magnificent lady. I couldn't have met anybody that I would have thought more about. Her intelligence. She inspired people, whether they were young, whether they were old. It didn't matter. She could reach everybody. She just had a way about her. So I really believe that all of us here that knew her, loved her, she lives on in every one of us, as far as I am concerned. And as I look around this group, I'm sure she does. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. For our last speaker, we have Dr. Tim Hunter. As I think everybody in the audience here has a story about Carolyn, and there are a lot of really funny ones because she had quite the sense of humor. So that seemed like a good way to end our formal discussion about Carolyn. Dr. Hunter is an amateur astronomer, dark sky advocate, and professor at University of Arizona College of Medicine. So come on up and let's hear your story.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be amongst this group. I'm just a mere amateur astronomer. It's not my professional thing. And it's just one of the most wonderful things for me to have met and gotten to know both Jean and Carolyn. And through my dear friend David, I met him and I knew him over a number of years. And in 1996, Bob Gent, another wonderful, unfortunately late individual, good friend of mine, and I it started what's called the Starry Nights Festival, which is a dark scar party in Yucca Valley, California, which is in the high desert above Palm Springs. And one year we decided to, David would always go over as the featured speaker. And David and I would drive over and have a great time kibitzing and gossiping about amateur astronomy. And one year I said, why don't we invite Carolyn over as the featured speaker? This is about 2005. We thought that was a fabulous idea. So Carolyn and David and I drove over to Yucca Valley. And Carolyn was just wonderful. You'd have program on a Saturday afternoon where she gave a talk, and everybody came up and just loved her and the fact that she was approachable. She'd sign autographs, look through people's solar telescopes. Wonderful. So that night, there was a star party at Madras Park. And this is a park on the edge of town. Actually, it was a school that had a football field, and the school parking lot was on top of a hill, and there's a really steep, rocky path to get down to the bottom to where the football field is. So we arrive after dark, and we get out of the car, and Dum-Dum here didn't have a flashlight, so Carolyn had this small little white flashlight. We'd go down this path, which is really kind of a dangerous path. And I was a lot younger then, but even then I was at risk for hip fracture, and Carolyn guides us down. And we get down to the bottom of the path, and this teenage girl, who was one of the ushers, rushes up and says, don't you know you can't have a white flashlight at a star party? Do you know anything about astronomy? Have you ever been to one of these before? And Carol says, oh, I'm so sorry. She puts it up. And David and I just laughed, and we wouldn't let her live this down for the rest of her days. Every time we talked to her, we would give her static about it. So I'm sure when she came to Bryce Canyon, she was proper and used a red flashlight. And certainly in her heavenly pursuit, she used a red flashlight. Unfortunately, in heaven, there's no light pollution. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That's the end of our scheduled speakers. Now we'll do an open mic. If you'd like to come up and say a few words about Carolyn, just come on up here and make sure to identify who you are and how you know Carolyn. So whoever would like to come up. I'm going to put Ivo Lakita on the spot because I know you were going to say something. Oh, okay. Here you go.
I'm Patrick Shoemaker, and it's a delight to be here. My relationship with my mother was a unique one, but very limited. And as a child, as the offspring of a person, I'm sure that people have had this experience. You go home and you kind of pick up where you were before. Sometimes you don't get over those roles that you've established. And one of the things about this, pardon the emotion in my voice, is that you realize how much more complex a person your parent is. And so it's a delight. It's a delight to get those other perspectives. And each of us has a unique perspective and a unique relationship with another person, and the person is so much more than that. And so it was a delight to hear from Mark Robinson in the fashion that he presented that. And I would urge others of you to share that as well. Somebody was talking earlier about the patience of my mother. And if you knew my father, you knew when he got a little bit frustrated doing something, and it could be minor, his language was rather blue, and which was not the case with my mother. And there was a time when my wife and I were staying at the house in the summer. We would come over from Los Angeles, and I think my father was doing something with wiring and not having an easy time of it and just cursing up a storm. And my wife Paula was, gosh, what's going on here? Why all this? And how do you deal with it? And so at one point she decided she'd look for my mother and couldn't find my mother anywhere, and went outside and wandered around the property and found my mother sitting under a tree reading a book. And she said, that's the secret. That's how you deal with with the language. But yeah, she was a remarkable model in patience in that fashion. I'll just throw that out there as one of those things that you can share, and others of you, I'm sure, have unique experiences, whether you were a colleague or a friend or a grandson who went with them to Australia. You have all of that, and I would encourage you to share those with us. Thanks.
Say something, Kevin.
Let me see if I can fix it.
No.
Goes up.
Go down.
Goes this way. There you go.
I wish they did that in the cafeteria. Whoops.
Good. If you want to hold it, we can take it out of the hook.
Oh, well, it works.
All right.
No.
There.
Probably most of you don't know who I am. I'm Jean's brother. A sister, yeah, not brother. You're right. James' sister, and his genes therefore continue to flow through me and two of his, and two of my children. Anyway, I thought you might enjoy a little earlier information about Jean. It seems that Jean, our father, would go off sometime whenever it occurred to him, and he'd go look Jean down, see how he was doing, mostly when he was in Caltech, and later, and knew that he had found a real friend, and a couple years later, he came, and Jean's lady that he was renting from told them that he was off in the field with a young lady and her mother. Well, this was the sister of the lady that he had met in Caltech. And so Daddy assumed he knew where Jean was, and he finally found them and looked them up. And that was our first indication, more or less, we'd met her brother, of Jean. Well, to make things short, life got more complicated, and I may be here except for, I know one, but are there two sisters here of Carolyn? They were.
Sister-in-law.
Huh?
Sister-in-law.
That's me. I'm the sister-in-law.
So's the other one.
Oh, where?
That was my Aunt Doreen. And she was the woman who went to school with my mother and who married my mother's brother.
Your mother's brother.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So that's how she's a sister-in-law.
Okay, she's the sister-in-law. But
Yes,
there were
she's
other cousins around here. Raise your hands, girls, unless you're going to talk. Or boy, if the case may be. Anyway, my first invitation to know Jean, not Jean, no, Carolyn, was when she shouldn't have done this to me. You girls who are out here and were her sisters, you should have gotten this invitation. But I was invited to be the mother, the union. Help me. Mother-in-law, not mother-in-law, but I was
Bridesmaid?
No, yes. Maid of honor. I was invited to be the maid of honor.
Yeah.
And so that was my invitation to knowing Carolyn. And many things along the way were very interesting and loving, and even though he gets that way, you forgave him. But but anyway, he was a fine brother. She was a fine sister, and I enjoyed both of them under many, many circumstances.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Careful, I made it here. I'm not sure I should.
Okay. Hear me? Is this good? All right. My name is Ivo Lukita, a research geologist who spent his entire professional career here at the USGS in Flagstaff. I even directed the place for a few years. I got there well before the Apollo missions and left when I retired. And that gave me plenty of time to get to know the Shoemakers, both socially and in a friendly kind of a way. The story I'm going to tell you is something that I think of as Genesis, and you will see why. In 1972, after the last of the Apollo missions was done, Gene Shoemaker, Don Elston, and I had a research project in the western Grand Canyon, a very remote place, whose purpose was, believe it or not, to see if the images, the pictures produced by the Earth-orbiting satellite Earth-1 were of any use whatsoever for doing geology on the Earth. And you may find this funny, but it's sensible because the resolution of those images was absolutely awful. My area was north of the Grand Canyon in a remote place called the Shiwits Plateau. Very empty, very lonely. The Shoemakers came to visit. And as they were wont to do, they loved camping out. My wife and I loved camping out, so that's what we did. And there we were sitting one evening after sundown, when it was dark, looking into this abyss in front of us, because we were sitting at the edge of a precipice, and also looking up at the sky, made incredible by the number and the brightness of the stars. It was so amazing that you almost felt that you could feel the radiation from these bodies. And we started talking, and I think Carolyn did most of the talking that time. And she started telling us, Barbara and me, how it is that those two, she and Gene, got started in this whole business of worrying about planetary bodies. And the story was this. Gene's first job with the USGS was out of Grand Junction, Colorado, and his job was to look for uranium deposits. I don't think that Gene was that fond of uranium deposits, but what he and Carolyn were very fond of was camping out in empty, silent places, which were easy to find at that time on the plateau. And when they were doing this, they would look up at this incredible sky that people who dwell at lower elevations, and especially in cities, have no idea of at all. And they looked and fell in love with it, and at some point they sort of thought, you know, it would be kind of fun to study some of these orbiting bodies. Wouldn't that be fine? Well, Gene wanted to be an astronaut, as many of you know, but he couldn't do it because of a physical problem. So he kind of took the second best thing and founded the science of planetary geology and the USGS Center here that was so instrumental in doing science on the moon during the Apollo missions. Now, Carolyn was not right there at the same, I mean, she was with Gene and had the same interest, but she couldn't do much about it at the time for a few small considerations such as family. And some of you know what I'm talking about. But eventually she came into her own. And I'll never forget the meeting of the Geological Society of America in Seattle. I forget the year, late 90s I think it was. when there was a presentation about the Shoemaker-Levy impact on Jupiter. The room that they had selected was quite a large one. In spite of that, there were overflow people all up and down the halls. And you could hear a pin drop, so rapt was the attention of everybody. And then when those images came up on the screen, none of us were breathing. It was just unbelievable. So Carolyn was, at that point, became an international figure for sure. And all of us were really quite amazed at what she had accomplished. So the genesis part of the story is that all of these accomplishments, the impact, the asteroids, the comets, founding planetary geology, founding the center here, probably went back to those nights on the Colorado Plateau where those two were looking at those stars with love in their hearts. Thank you.
Hi, it's like others have said, it's wonderful to see you all here. I met Pat the first day of junior high school, ninth grade, after Gene had moved to Pasadena to be the director of geology at Caltech. And I'd been at that school 3 years, and I just had this sort of intuitive sense about who was new and who wasn't. And I think my first class, I spotted this kid who just looked different. Second class, he's in my class. Third class, he's in my class. Fourth class, German. There were only 6 of us. And I think I approached him and said, maybe we should know each other. And the rest is history. I mean, the family has been, I can trace almost everything I've done in the rest of my life, with few exceptions, back to that meeting, of meeting Pat. I'm a climber because of it. I've done river trips because of it. I'm not really a geologist or a geophysicist, but I did go into that sort of business. And they were like second parents to me. Both my brother and I have a twin brother. I lived with them for a couple summers. So I've seen the good and the bad, most of it good, but anyone who's, as you all know, Carolyn is the calm one, and Gene is like on fire, and the next minute he's laughing his head off. So I just have such fond memories of Carolyn, and as I said in my video, which was, whoever came up with 30 seconds is nuts, because that's not enough time. But anyway, I said that I think it was either after a river trip or when I went back to college after my last time of working with Gene. I remember they were dropping me off at an airport or something, and I just turned to them in the car and I said, you guys have been so important to me, and I really love you, and I'm glad I had that chance, because I never got the chance again. So I miss them. I miss Carolyn dearly, and Gene as well, and I'm so happy I'm still friends with Pat and the Shoemaker family. Thank you.
You heard a few minutes ago from my mother, Maxine Shoemaker Heath, Jean's little sister, 8 years younger. Jean was her only sibling. She had no sisters. Yes, she did. Carolyn was one of her couple of sisters, and she always considered her a sister. They were sisters in more than one way, and I don't know how many of you know that Carolyn belonged to a group called the PEO Sisterhood, which, and Lisa will, her tagline she just mentioned speaks to me, because our tagline as a sisterhood is women helping women reach for the stars. And my Aunt Carolyn was a member of PEO, so she was not only my aunt but my sister, and she and I often spoke about that when we were together. Apart from that, I wanted to say what a mentor she was for me. So Jean and Carolyn were a team, and for that generation especially, frequently behind the great man was a great woman doing a lot of work. My mom and dad were that way. Later, at 42, my mom got her PhD in entomology, although she was originally in English and had a master's in library science. And she and my dad worked as a team. Those two teams were mentors to me because my husband I met in graduate school studying Mesoamerican archaeology. And we've been a team. He was ahead of me. He had the major career, but I worked with him. And I always thought about my mom and dad and my Uncle Gene and Aunt Carolyn. I'd wanted to be an astronomer because of Uncle Gene, and then my interest drifted toward archaeology. Not geology exactly, archaeology, but still related to what he did. And we had wonderful conversations. So I miss both my uncle and aunt dearly. They were very important to me. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Leonard. I'm working at the University of Arizona. And I first met Gene and Carolyn in the early 90s at the USGS, where I was a summer intern. And they took me to Palomar to search for near-Earth asteroids and comets. And it was an exciting time. And I remember Carolyn we would do most of the imaging, take the images and process the films, as David well knows, in the dark room there in the wet chemistry times. And Carolyn would do the scanning, looking for comets and especially fast-moving objects, potential near-Earth asteroids. We would eventually bring some films back to Flagstaff, and Carolyn's already vetted these, and she would hand me some films and say, well, maybe there's some sort of garden variety main belt asteroids yet to be discovered on these films. So she sort of told us what it would look like. We put them on a stereo microscope, the two different films. All the stars would just appear like black dots in this case on these films. And any new object would appear to be floating above the background of the stars. That's what it looks like in the stereo microscope. So I saw a couple of these, and then I started to have at it myself. And I got all excited. I saw a really odd looking thing. It looked like it was floating above the film. Carolyn, come, quick, what is this thing? And so she looked through the microscope, and then she kind of slowly bent down, and with a puff of breath, it's gone. I just blew it away. I don't think that's an asteroid. I said, well, maybe, 20 tons of meteoric material fall on Earth every night. And maybe a little dust speck of an asteroid just came drifting down on there. She said, you might be a poet, but that's still not an asteroid, and we can't submit it to the minor planets there. So they taught me the joy of discovery, spending time under the night skies, and they are the most cherished nights of my professional career in observing. Flash forward, I work for a project called the Catalina Sky Survey through the University of Arizona. And we're sort of the next generation surveys for dangerous near-Earth asteroids, comets too. So, each night I'm looking for the same things that we were looking for at Mount Palomar. And Carolyn, Gene, you're in my heart. They were the most joyous nights I spent under those starry skies at Mount Palomar, in your presence, under your mentorship and friendship. Looking for new things in the cosmos.
Okay, so I came out here from Illinois to honor my Aunt Carolyn, and you've heard from my sister and my mom. The reason I wasn't planning on speaking, but the reason I'm speaking is because most of you know her for her astronomy and the work that she did with comets and asteroids. And I don't think about her that way very much, although I will share a brief story. Mostly I think about her as a very compassionate person. When I was a little kid, I had asthma. We would come up here and Pat would go hiking with my sisters up at high altitudes, and I really couldn't do that very well. And she would stay back, she'd be with me, we'd have a wonderful time. She'd listen to me play the piano, and I'm so sorry. We would have these great conversations about life, and she was always so supportive. And later, I came out, and she was getting into her new career, and she did show me how she could spot an asteroid by looking for the dash, which was really super cool for me. Later, she came up to my house in the Seattle area, and this was probably 2006, 2007, something like that. And I was looking to go back to work. I had raised my kids, and I knew that my mom had gotten her PhD at 42, and Aunt Carolyn had started her work at 51. And she was very inspiring to me to go back and restart my career in law. And now I have a really wonderful position, not at all related to what you all do. But she was just always so encouraging about being who you are, being true to yourself. And I think we need to think about her not just as an astronomer, not just as an asteroid and comet discoverer, but as a truly compassionate and wonderful mentor to all young people and ultimately to all adults. So I just wanted to say that.
This thing really needs wrangling. I didn't quite get it. I'm David Hodge. I'm not sure whether he's my body double or I'm his body double, but I'm Peter Hodge's twin brother. I got to tag along on this adventure with the Shoemakers, thanks to Peter and Pat being in the same classes. I was in, I think, one or two of them. Anyway, to pick up on what was just said, and I'm sure this is a parallel for Peter, but what I found being part of the Shoemaker family was we could just go hang out with Pat, and it was like being in just sort of, we were just part of the family. And Carolyn was always there because Jean was probably, off doing whatever Jean was doing. And it's just so relaxing and fun, and always something interesting and different going on. So that was something that Carolyn in particular gave us, was that sort of second family nurturing. And of course, Christy and Linda and Pat were all part of that, and Jean was part of that. Toby the dog was part of that. The house on Holliston, Caltech neighborhood was part of that. That was just a wonderful gift. One little anecdote, I remember we used to listen to a lot of different music, and the band America was hot at that time, and I don't know, I in particular was really enthralled by this song, Horse with No Name. And I just remember Carolyn walking into the room, and I said, "Isn't this really cool? Don't you just love this music or something?" And she said, "Well, it only has 2 chords." Wow, I hadn't thought of that. I was just taken by the melody and everything. And that has stuck with me all these years. I was actually a professional musician for a while, and that, I don't know whether that played into any of it, but that just was another aspect of Carolyn that wasn't necessarily evident just to look at her. I also had the opportunity to live with him in the Shoemaker house. One thing Peter didn't mention was we spent 10 days at the house while it was under construction. Peter was, we would both go out and collect the basalt that the stonemason would use to build the walls, and Peter was helping with mixing the cement and whatever, and I was patching the driveway. That driveway was a real challenge to drive. I had a chance to go to Palomar with Jean and Carolyn sometime, it was probably the late 80s, and experienced that event of observing for one night. I think the last time I saw Carolyn was, I think 2006, around there. My son was around 10, and I had taken him to the Boulder Dam. We did the dam tour, as they call it. And we were sort of getting closer and closer to Flagstaff, and I was feeling guilty because I hadn't called, hadn't done anything. I just thought, well, let's go to Flagstaff and kind of see. And I call up the house, and what I'm told is, you better get here fast because Pat and Paul are leaving soon. So I don't know, we ended up spending a couple of days, had a great time with everybody who was there, and then my son and I went off someplace else. But I was always thinking, oh, I should just call and say hi. And I remember one time I sent a postcard and I just said, I think of you a lot more frequently than you would ever know. So, Carolyn, yeah, really, just, you just can't describe it. It was wonderful.
I'm Bärbel Lukita from the USGS. I do not have a funny story about Carolyn, but I know that she was very, very generous, and the first impression I got of that is when she was assigned a wonderful office at the USGS with a glorious view of the peaks, and she was in that office all by herself. And I lived in a dank little dark office just across the hall. And at some point she stuck her head in and she says, you know, I have this big, huge office. You know, why don't you come on in? So I joined her. And so eventually there were these two old white-haired ladies sharing this office. Now, Carolyn came into the office almost every day, work days of course, because I guess she wanted to get away from whatever she was doing. And she would walk down the hall. She was already quite old, small, on her stick. She would come in, sit in front of the computer. She wasn't that too familiar with computers, but the gurus managed to arrange it all for her. So she would come in and read her email. And of course there was email still from all over the world, and she loved to read that. She actually loved the attention. She loved to be wined and dined at conferences. She was that kind of person. She was just so open to everybody. So anyway, she came in and she read her email every day, and we sat and chatted. And like Mark Robinson said earlier, I don't know what we chatted about. It was just everything. It wasn't the moon or Mars or things like that necessarily. It was mostly just everyday life and how we felt about things and politics and whatever. It was wonderful. And then when she was done, she got up, she got her little stick, she walked down the hall, not to the nearest exit, but to the farthest exit, where she could walk by all the open office doors and go by and say hi to everybody that was in, and then disappeared. We all love Carolyn, and I will never forget my former roommate. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Gary Fleece. I was one of Jean's advisees in grad school, and of course got to know Carolyn very well during that period of time. I just had a couple of vignettes about her, and that's all. Jean was elected to the prestigious award of the prestigious Bowie Award of the American Geophysical Union. And he and Carolyn were sitting on the stage in San Francisco, where Gene was to accept the award. And so Don Anderson steps up, director of the Seismo Lab at Caltech, to do the introduction. And he starts off, Dr. Shoemaker has an honorary doctorate with the University of Arizona. Dr. Shoemaker is a fellow of the AGU. And he went on for about 2 minutes with awards and honors and so forth. Then he stopped and he looked down at Gene and Carolyn. He said, of course, I'm talking about Dr. Carolyn Shoemaker. And I just love that. And then I invited Carolyn out to the USGS in Menlo Park to talk about Shoemaker Levy 9. And it was a wonderful talk, of course. And during the Q&A period, I asked her, I said, Carolyn, we would like to know who is the primary scientific motivator in your little team of 2. And she looked down at the floor very shyly and says, well, I think it was Gene. And I said, well, Carolyn, I'm not sure we're buying that. And then one more thing, I was skiing up the ski bowl at the snow bowl, and every day they printed a different name on the ticket so they could tell that you were legit. And one day it was Shoemaker. I said, holy cow, this place has some class. And I'm not sure which Shoemaker they were referring to, but I took it back and I taped it on Carolyn's door. And I was just so proud that Flagstaff, and in particular the Snow Bowl, actually knew that name well enough to put it on the lift ticket. So Carolyn, we love you and we'll miss you. God bless.
I think I need a microphone adjustment. I'm about Carolyn's height. I'll take off my glasses so you can see my eyes. Hi, my name is Karen Elston, and I'm one of the few people that get to call Uncle Gene and Aunt Carolyn Uncle Gene and Aunt Carolyn. And of course, it all started the night before I was born. And it involved Uncle Gene, Aunt Carolyn, my father, Donald, and his wife, Shirley. And I think there was a card game and some beer involved. And the next morning, my mom went into labor and had twins, identical twins, my sister Janet and me. So Janet had a name, and it was Janet Elizabeth. So brother's name, Jay, Jeff, Janet, and then there was me. They had a boy's name picked out. And so for 2 weeks, I didn't have a name. And Uncle Gene came up with a name, Karen Patricia. So there was Jay, Jeff, Janet, and Karen. And it turns out it was a derivative of Carolyn. So Uncle Gene and Aunt Carolyn knew each other from my parents knew each other from Grand Junction to Menlo Park to Flagstaff. And when they moved here, this is where the real village and family came from. We all shared a house. So there was Uncle Gene, Aunt Carolyn, my mom, my dad, my mom and dad's 4 kids, and then Patrick, Christy, and Linda. And then Uncle Gene and my dad flew out to Menlo Park and adopted 2 kitties from Grammy Shoemaker. There's Sinbad, which was Shoemaker's cat, and Luna. Well, there are craters named up on the moon after our 2 cats. And the village of the Shoemaker-Elston clan began from vacations together to Colorado River trips and all of life's travels in between and ups and downs. So from the time we were all little itty bitty and the Gemini Apollo moon mapping golden days of astrogeophysics and geology. And Uncle Gene and Aunt Carolyn went their way with going after comets and meteors and investigating craters. And my dad did what was called paleomagic or paleomagnetics. Had a big installation out at Fort Valley Experimental Station. And they used to go down the Colorado River and drill holes into rocks before anybody really knew what was happening. So the connection goes way back from being family friends to colleagues to sharing life together. And one of the last times I saw Aunt Carolyn was at the Orpheum Theater for the 50th anniversary of the USGS and the moon landing. And it was a special time, and her eyes lit up with a twinkle. And I'd like to think all the stars were reflecting back on everybody and everyone who knew her. So keep that twinkle in your eye and keep looking up, because they are still here. And love and kisses to the Shoemaker family.
I'm Jeff Placia. I guess I had a somewhat different encounter with Caroline. I got to spend quite a few Southern Hemisphere winters with her and Jean in Australia, out in the outback. And, you know, as Evo mentioned, they loved camping, and they were living constantly out of this little tiny box on the back of a truck. But a couple times I was doing work and she had to help me. And I was doing gravity work, which is boring anyway. And to help somebody do gravity work is even worse. But she stuck it out and helped me quite a bit. And then every night, as far as Jean was concerned, 5 o'clock, that's it, go back to camp. And we'd all sit around drinking white wine, eating pate in the middle of nowhere. But then we'd sit around once the flies went away and just talk, and it was a great experience. I can't remember exactly what we talked about, as several people have said, but it was really great being with them out there in the middle of nowhere and with the bright sky above us.
Hi, I'm Christy Shoemaker. I hadn't really planned to speak, but I just wanted to say, kind of echoing what my brother did, Carolyn was mom to me. And being here, listening to all of your stories, is sharing another part of the life that she had. And it's just so significant to my brother and me and my children, well, my son who is here, and grandchildren. And I just wanted to say, as a daughter, my mother and I never had that contention that is so often present in mother-daughter relationships. We, for the most part, I think maybe there were a couple of times as a teen she kind of had her had her doubts, but for the most part we had a wonderful lifelong relationship. She was just a rock. And she, as you can see, was so much to so many people. You've heard so many stories from colleagues she had, family members, the friends that we would bring home. She was someone who inspired them and encouraged them, and she encouraged all of us to follow our path. And I want to thank you all for being here. For some of you, it's been a long journey to get here, and we just appreciate each and every one of you. And I appreciate all of you who helped to put this together. Thank you so much.
If there's not anybody else, we'll wind up here. Before I go, I think I'll share a story about Carolyn that we laughed about in recent years. I really got to know her over the last 10 years or so. Events we would do up here at Lowell Observatory, and as we were celebrating the anniversary of the moon flights, she would always be very willing to come and participate in these events. And so quite often I would go to her house and pick her up. And on one of these trips, I had a vehicle that was a little bit higher, the seat was a little bit higher, and so I walked her to the passenger side and asked if she needed help, and she said, no, I've got it. But I stood behind her, and she got her hand on the hold and pulled herself up. And inertia was going that way, but then gravity came over, and she said, uh-oh, and she started coming back toward me. And in a moment of clarity, I realized that I didn't want to be the person who had dropped Carolyn Shoemaker. So I put my hands up to catch her, and I wasn't worried about where my hands were. And one found her backside, and I pushed her, and she went in the seat. And as soon as she landed, she said, that was the best thrill I've had in 5 years. And I was a little embarrassed, and I said, sorry. And she said, I won't tell Jean if you don't. And she just was such a wonderful person, a friend, a family member, a colleague, and it's really inspiring for me to see everybody that's come out to hear about her and to share her life and stories. So thank you for coming up. This will end our formal session, but certainly stay around for a little bit and catch up with old friends. Thank you. Like an umbrella. And one more thing, we have some sandwiches and snacks and stuff and drinks on the side, so make yourself at home with that.